Good morning, everyone, and welcome again to another Technical Tuesday for the month of May. I think for the title of this presentation, as you can see, it's going to be seed tags, and this is going to be presented by the Research Shop. I think Betsy, Caitlin, and Chris will be in charge of this, so I'm going to turn it over to them so they will start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Uziel. This is Betsy McShane, the state biologist for NRCS in New Jersey, and I will begin the presentation and will be joined in a little while by Chris Miller, our plants materials specialist and the Cape May Plants Center manager, and Caitlin Forbotnik, our state conservation agronomist. So today we're going to talk about seed tags, and when we talk about when we're working with producers and we're planning on implementing vegetative conservation practices, there's a lot of research and planning that goes into it. You have to research the right mix, calculate the rate that you would want to use, and make sure that your equipment is set up correctly. But really, what's important in addition to all of this is to make sure that you have the right seed. And a lot of that information can be found in the seed tags when the seed is delivered to the site. There is a ton of information included in a seed tag. Everything that is on this list, 12 different items, all in a condensed, somewhat confusing label. So what we wanted to do today was to work through that label and help you understand what kind of information can be found there to make sure that what you spent all that time researching and planning is actually what's getting into the ground so that you have a successful conservation practice. So let's talk about the different parts of the seed tag. So the first part is the name. And this is the variety and the species of the seed that's in that bag. The tag should include the variety name, if known. Otherwise, it'll have the initials VNS, which is variety not stated. Next, we have the lot number. This is a series of letters and or numbers assigned by the grower for tracking purposes. All seed requires a lot number. The next thing you see is purity. And this is the pure seed, or the purity is the percent of seed of the lot that is stated for the species. For example, a purity of 90% tells you that 10% of the bag is other material. That can be inert material like chaff, it could be weed seed, or it could be other crops. So this is important to know. The next thing is the crop. So what are some of that other 10%? What crops are they? The percent by weight that is crop other than the seed species labeled. This does not include the weed seed. The crop seed must be listed by name if it is more than 5% of the content. This includes annual crops and grass and forb species that are not the target species. So this is important to know, and it could explain if you're seeing other things popping up in the field that you planted. The next thing listed on the label is inert. Now, this is the percent by weight of chaff, sticks, dirt, and other debris. Higher inert percentages would affect the seed flow through a drill. So we know if anyone has ever been to a site where they harvest seed for production purposes, you know that the seed is harvested in the field and goes through a cleaning process, but other material can still get through after that process. If there is dirt, sticks, other debris in that mix, it could clog up your seeding mechanisms. The next thing on the seed tag is the weed seed, and that's the percentage of common and restricted weed seed in a lot. So it's not expected that after a harvest of seed, and even when it's clean, that it's going to be 100% clean. There is some weed species that can be in that mix, a tolerable amount, but it's important to know what that amount is and what those seeds are in those weeds. So the next thing on the seed tag is the germination. And this is the percentage of seed that germinates in a set period of time under specific lab conditions. So they've tested this at the seed company. It determines the capability of a seed lot to produce normal seedlings under favorable conditions. So assuming that you have the right temperatures, the right precipitation, this will help you know what percentage of seed you can expect to germinate. All right. And the next thing, the DORM seed, that stands for dormant seed, or it can also be considered the hard seed. And that's the portion of the seed sample that does not germinate during the time period of that seed test, but it is determined to be alive and respiring. Hard seed is a type of dormant seed that has a seed coat that's impermeable to water. So this dormant seed, it doesn't germinate when they're doing that testing time frame, but it's still good seed. It's still alive and respiring, and it may, seed, it'll grow at a later time. Okay, so the next thing is the total germ. This is also known as the total viability. And the germination percentage plus the hard or dormant seed percentage. So you have your germination rate plus the dormant seed percentage. For example, 80% germination plus 10% dormant seed equals the total viability of 90%. So you have the 80 from the germ, the 10 from the dormant seeding, and then you get your 90 for your total germination. The next thing is the origin. So in this case, ND stands for North Dakota. The location, this is the location where the seed was grown. For NRCS programs, refer to the respective your state field office tech guide for accepted origin areas for non-varietal species, and as opposed to local source native species. There is no germination or origin of named varieties, but they must be included in the state field office tech guide list of accepted named varieties for each species. The next thing is the net weight. So that's the bulk weight of the material in the bag, the total amount. So this is, in this example, a 40-pound bag. And you'll need to know that for when you're doing some calculations that we'll talk about later. And then they always include the test date. And this is the month and the year of the germination test. And a little bit later, Caitlin is going to talk about New Jersey policy related to this and our state instruction about testing dates. And the last thing on the seed tag is the name and the address of the seller. Where was it? Who produced it? And what is their contact information? There's one other thing that we didn't talk about on the seed tag, and that's noxious weeds. Each state has noxious weed species that are restricted or prohibited, as well as the maximum allowable amount of seed of restricted noxious weeds. Restricted noxious weeds must be listed by name and total seeds per pound identified on the tag. Seed containing prohibited noxious weed seeds cannot be sold and planted in the state where it is listed as prohibited. State law regulating noxious weed seeds may be different from law regulating noxious weed plants. So that the important thing is states have different laws for what can be in seed bags, in seed mixes, as opposed to plants. So when you go to your Home Depots or landscape centers, the actual plants that you grow, they can be different lists. The USDA Agricultural Marketing Service has on their home website a link to each state's regulations. And I will show you New Jersey's in just a moment, but this is something if you are ever working on a detail in another state or move to another area, you can always go to AMS, the Agricultural Marketing Services website, to see what the local seed regulations are. Some other information that you could find on a seed tag could be when the seed should be sold by specific states. Sometimes there's an expiration date, and then information on for the weight of the seed bag itself. And then the Agricultural Marketing Service assigns seed packaging numbers that every seed company has to include. And then you can also find things like whether or not the seeds are GMO or treated with growth stimulators. So I mentioned that I was going to share with you the information specific to our state for noxious weed seed regulations. And for us, this is found on the New Jersey Department of Agriculture's website. So you can see here that there's a list of prohibited weed seed, and then there's restricted weed seed. And this is for an agricultural, vegetable, flower, or shrub seed. And New Jersey first had the New Jersey State Seed Law, and that was first put in place in 1948. So this has been around for quite a bit. And then that law was replaced in 1963, and that is the current New Jersey State Seed Law that we are using, and that these species are tied to. So you can see that bindweed, hedge bindweed, quackgrass, Canada thistle, and horse nettle are all prohibited. And this is specific for agriculture. And then the following seeds may be present in a seed lot, but shall be listed on the label prior under the heading of noxious weed seed. And this is dodder, corn cockle, wild garlic, wild onion, otherwise known as cheatgrass, Bermuda grass, Johnson grass, spurred anota, giant ragweed, and bird cucumber. And then there's also a list that is weed seed that is restricted specifically for lawn and turf seed. And this includes Bermuda grass, annual bluegrass, rough bluegrass, bent grass, meadow fescue, tall fescue, orchard grass, timothy grass, velvet grass. So you can see a few on this list that are things that we commonly recommend even for our pasture mixes, but they are specifically restricted if it's going to be used for a lawn and turf seed application. All right. So the seed tag looks a little bit different if it's not for a single species bag of seed. Sometimes we have seed mixtures. And anytime there is a seed tag for a seed mixture, it will specifically point out that it is for a mixture. It will include the location of where it was produced. In this instance, it was North Dakota and also South Dakota as well. So different species were grown in different areas. And then you'll also have the individual purity and germination, including both the hard and dormant seed percentages. And then you'll have your percentages for your weed seed, for your other crops, and your inert matter. And in this case, you're going to add those together to get the percent of a whole. So you see that you have, if you add up the percent pure seed, you have the 30, 30, 20, and 10. So that adds up to 30, 60, 80, 90. And that's just of your pure seed. But then once you add in your weed seed, which is another 0.5%, your inert matter, which is 4.5, and your other crop at 5%, that's the additional 10% that gets you to that 100% total. All right, and one thing we wanted to remind you of today is that we have our vegetative planting technical reference that we put together a couple years ago now for New Jersey specifically. And this can be found in our field office technical guide under section 4. And if you scroll down to ecological science tools, that's where you'll find the link to our New Jersey vegetative planting guide. And this is what it looks like. And we just wanted to remind you of some of the resources that are available in the vegetative planting guide. This is the table of contents, and there's some general requirements and reference tables, but also there's some information on how to use certified seed and calculating pure life seed information and buying and mixing individual species. So this is a good reference to go back to if you are putting together your seed mixes, need some recommendations, but then also when it gets to the time where you're out in the field and you're standing next to the producer and they have their equipment ready to go and their bags of seeds and their drill, and you have to make sure that everything gets seeded, the right seed at the right rate. Here's some references. And next in the presentation, Chris Miller is going to share with us some more specific information. So Chris,
Thanks,
you
Betsy.
Sure, go right ahead. And as soon as you want me to forward to the next slide, just let me know.
All right, I'll just say next, I guess.
That would be perfect.
Or some other grunt or whatever. So I'm going to take this a step further and talk a little bit about seed certification considerations and different levels of seed certification, which actually the Plant Materials Program abides by. We follow the crop standards and genetic standards that were established by the Association of Official Seed Certifying Agencies, AOSCA. And we've been following these guidelines since about 1993, which is about the time I came to the Plant Materials Program. So they generate standards on how to grow seed here for seed production, for distribution to growers, as well as the different levels of release that a purchaser would want to potentially buy. And so I'm just going to explain that a little bit. Next, Betsy. There's a delay. All right, so here are the classes of seed certification. And I may be telling you more than what you need to know at this point, but I'm going to relate it back to some applicable stuff here in a few slides. So when we set out to release a plant material or a seed variety to a commercial marketplace, we are the original the grower of that material. Like Betsy mentioned on the seed tag, it said the origin of whatever material was in that bag. So we maintain the breeder stock of whatever materials we distribute to commercial growers that we have, selected for different purposes. So we distribute the breeder seed to the growers, and they can grow foundation, registered, or certified seed. We also have foundation seed growing here at the Plant Materials Center, which is the progeny of the breeder seed. And then we often distribute the foundation seed to growers also. And they can either get the seed registered, or in most cases for commercial sale, the seed is sold as certified seed, if it's good quality seed. And we promote the use of certified seed for the purchaser, because that guarantees the quality of the material. So any commercial grower can start with their breeder seed, so they maintain that original material. They use that the first generation, it becomes the foundation seed, and then the second generation is the registered or certified seed. Next. And here's just different colored tags to indicate what level of certification it is. For varieties or cultivars, which I'll explain in a little bit, we have the foundation, registered, and certified, which I just mentioned. We also have what we refer to as pre-varietal release alternatives, which we've been promoting in the Plant Materials Program since the early 1990s. And I'll explain what these different levels are: source identified, selected, and tested. Now, these still, whether it's source identified, selected, or tested, we still encourage that material to be certified according to the AOSCA guidelines. Next. So NRCS recommends using the certified seed when available. And the reason why we do this is it's an indication that the bag of seed is high quality seed. It's a known genetic source and origin, which we talked about on the tag. The genetic purity and the germination ability is there on the tag. The presence of weed seed and other crops, and it's free of noxious weeds, or if noxious weeds are there, it'll be identified on the seed tag. So all those things that Betsy just mentioned were items in the seed tag. Next. So the certification process is accomplished by accurate record keeping, of course. We get our fields inspected here by the Department of Agriculture. They make sure that they do a phytosanitary inspection, make sure we have isolation distances from one variety or germplasm production to another, so there's no crossing that goes on. And then we get a certificate from the Department of Agriculture that everything looks good. And it would be the same with a commercial grower. They would be under the control of whatever certifying agency in the particular state that they're growing the material in. Obviously, we are the New Jersey. We're inspected by the New Jersey Department of Ag, the Division of Plant Industry Seed Certification and Control, and that's the same group that does the seed lot testing. So they'll go out to the seed suppliers. They'll sample seed from bags, and they'll make sure that the seed tag is accurate for whatever material is in that bag. So it's a pretty big job, actually, that the Department of Agriculture has. In other states, it could be, there's different groups that certify seed in other states. Some are crop improvement associations, some are seed co-ops, and many are Department of Agriculture divisions. Next. So common seed, if it says the variety not specified, or it's just common seed or non-certified seed, it's not grown under any certification program, so it really can't be guaranteed to be high quality, even if it's named, even if it's a variety name, but it's not, if it hasn't been certified, you can't be guaranteed that the seed quality is there, or even what's specified on the label is what's accurate in the bag. So we try to avoid, purchasing. We try to tell people to avoid purchasing common seed. Next. So a little bit more about these release alternatives that I mentioned that the program's been using since the early 1990s, and many of the commercial growers have also adopted. So the first level is source identified. So whenever you look at it, say the Ernst seed catalog, and it'll say New Jersey origin, or Pennsylvania origin, or North Carolina origin, that's basically their way of saying that it's a source identified material. In other words, Ernst went out into the field, they collected switchgrass or little blue stem or whatever from those various areas, and they establish a production field and they sell it. So there's no selection that occurred with that. It's basically just whatever genetic material they found in the field, took it back to their facility, grew it out, and are selling it. So that's the first level. So that's really getting the plant material out the door quickly. So if, for example, if Ernst or Pinelands or Roundstone or whatever these large seed companies see an identified need for a particular species, and people requesting certain species that maybe aren't commercially available, this is kind of a fast track to get that material available commercially. Now, selected is the next level up, where you go out and do wild collecting in multiple locations. We call them the accessions of a particular species, and then evaluate those accessions at your facility. Here, we do it here at the Plant Materials Center. Commercial growers do it at their facility. In some cases, although most commercial nurseries don't go above the source identified level unless they're purchasing like a cultivar or a variety from us or from somewhere else. So selection is basically you're just selecting that material for one or more traits that are identified. There's no proof of superiority, but you're basically taking multiple accessions. In our case, we combine them, and we make that material available if it meets whatever criteria that we have selected for that species. This process takes maybe 2 to 4 years or 5 years or so. For example, our timber germplasm switchgrass was released for biomass production, and it basically went through just that simple selection process. And it's multiple accessions of North Carolina origin switchgrass material. If the variety name has germplasm after it, that means it's a pre-varietal. It's not a variety or cultivar. It's pre-varietal, meaning that it's either source identified, selected, or tested. Now, tested is the next level up, which requires testing for more than one generation. It's evaluation in multiple sites. It has heritable, desirable traits, and has some proven genetic superiority for whatever purpose you're looking at it for. For example, we have a sea oats that we have named after Don Hamer, who originally collected the seed from North Carolina, Virginia, I think Georgia, South Carolina. Anyway, the original collections were done by the Plant Materials Center back in the starting in the 80s. We've done testing of that material in multiple locations over multiple years. And so we're releasing this material at the tested level. Now, the cultivar level is the most intensive, and these are the variety at the variety level. And it's a well-known range of adaptation. It's been tested for multiple generations. It's usually developed for a specific purpose, whether it be for forage, whether it be for biomass production in some cases, or for erosion control. And this is the level that the Plant Materials Program traditionally has selected our releases at. And these take 10, 15, 20, 25 years to select and develop. So we've gotten away from doing that, since the early 90s when these pre-varietal releases came out. So, that just kind of explains how, what we go through to release at these various different levels. Next. So how does that relate back to what we do or what you do in the field? So some other some considerations for selecting either a variety or pre-variety releases. For example, if you're really concerned about erosion control, for example, a critical area planting on a disturbed site, a drastically disturbed site, or if you're concerned about forage quality, you want to make sure you get a variety that works for forage and is high quality, or for biomass production, and even in some cases for cover crop applications. That's where these cultivars really come into play. And because you have a known performance over a wide geographic area, and you know that whatever purpose that they were selected for, they're going to perform well in that environment and to solve that resource problem. The pre-varietal germplasm, those source identified, selected, and tested materials may be more appropriate for some practices, for example, rare and declining natural communities, wildlife plantings, conservation cover, where you want to have genetic diversity, you want to have plant diversity, and you're not that concerned about superior performance from the standpoint of providing a lot of erosion control. You don't have to worry necessarily about the forage quality from a livestock standpoint, or you're not looking at, biomass production. So that's where the pre-varietal material comes in handy. Next. So again, seed quality, you have to understand that seed lots vary widely in quality. They contain inert, undesirable seeds and injured or immature seeds in a lot of cases. And again, the seed testing, gives you constraints on that. And the certified seed provides that genetic purity, varietal identification, and minimizes introducing weed seed into the planting. Next. So the use of certified seed helps protect the buyer. That's the ultimate goal of using certified seed. Next. And purity is obviously expressed as the composition of the lot, degree of contamination. Purity tests separate out pure seed from inert, from crop seed from weed seed, which Betsy already talked about is identified on the seed tag. Next. And the germination, again, the ability of that seed to initiate growth. The embryo is alive and it will produce a young seedling under desirable conditions. Betsy mentioned dormant seed. So that seed which germinates when subjected to cool and or cool moist conditions for a period of like 30 to 90 days. So it's viable seed and it's part of the germination percentage, but it may not germinate immediately. And one of the things that we see, particularly with native warm season grasses, is if you're receiving seed that was harvested, say you're receiving the seed that was harvested in the fall, and you're going to do a spring planting the following year, depending on the level of dormant seed in that seed lot, you may not see a lot of that seed germinate that first year, that first growing season, because it hasn't gone through the cool, moist stratification. So in a lot of cases, we actually recommend, doing a fall dormant seeding or a fall seeding, late fall seeding, where that seed will sit in the ground through the winter, and then it's more likely that at least the dormant seed percentage is more likely to germinate the following spring. And I know that's why a lot of the pollinator plantings are recommended for the fall also, because a lot of the wildflower seed is either dormant or has a hard seed, which needs to, you need to break that dormancy. Now, hard seed's a little different than dormant seed in that, again, it doesn't germinate during the test. It has an impermeable seed coat. So many legumes, wildflowers, and even shrubs have these hard seed coats, which can be broken through stratification over time, although usually not immediately. There's also scarification, meaning that you actually rub the seed with like a sandpaper on a block of some kind to actually scarify the seed to break that seed coat so it can actually absorb water. There's also acid scarification that occurs for some seed. And again, you're not going to do this out in the field, but just to know that that hard seed needs to be broken somehow by either physical or chemical scarification. Next. So pure live seed is the germination, which includes the dormant seed and hard seed, times the purity divided by 100. So, it's a fairly simple calculation. I'll go through a couple examples here. So we purchase seed on a pure live seed basis to ensure the planting meets the seeding recommendations of the NRCS practice standards, okay? We know that seed is of high quality. You want to purchase the certified seed, and that's what's being recommended for conservation practices to ensure that the plant material is genetically similar to the original plant release as possible. So this statement was actually taken out. This reminds me to mention that the National Plant Materials Program did a tech note number 7 called "The Importance of Seed Quality for Natural Resource Conservation Practices." It was actually released April a year ago, April 2022. If you're interested in looking at this, you're more likely to find it if you Google the name of the tech note, as opposed to trying to find it on our website. With the new website, there's a lot of broken links. So the name of it is "The Importance of Seed Quality for Natural Resource Conservation Practices." Next. So here's an example calculation. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. I'm going to give you a cool season grass example and a warm season grass example. So cool season grasses typically have fairly high purity and fairly high germination. So in a lot of cases, cool season grasses are not actually sold on a pure live seed basis, because the pure live seed basis is almost just like the straight whatever germination and purity you have. So here's an example of a turf type tall fescue, Rebel. It has 99% purity, 87% germination. So you have a pure live seed percentage of 86. So that's pretty high. If it's above 80, 85%, that's pretty good. And really, by doing the pure live seed calculation, that doesn't really change your seeding rate too much, which that'll kind of come into focus in a little bit. Next. Now, for warm season grasses, it's a little different, because typically warm season grasses have lower germination percentage. Hopefully the purity is still fairly high, 80, 85% or so. But it's not uncommon to find germination percentages of our native warm season grasses at 30%, 45, 55, 60, 70. So a lot of it, it's related to dormancy, and just related to the fact that when the seed is harvested, there's a lot of seed there that's just not going to germinate. So we go through this calculation of PLS, and we come out with, so if you multiply 85% purity by 55% germination, divide by 100, that's 46%. Okay, so that's much lower than the cool season grass example I just gave you. Next. So we have to adjust our seeding rate based on that pure live seed percentage in order to make sure we're actually applying the viable pounds of seed, the PLS that's recommended for that particular seeding rate. So what you would do, so for example, if the Rumsey Indian grass is recommended to be seeded at 7 pounds PLS per acre, and you only have a 46% PLS, next, actually, I thought I had the calculation. So the pure live seed is used to calculate the amount of seed to buy for planting.
Chris, you have it on the next slide.
Okay, that's what I thought. I missed it. Okay, there we go. All right, thanks. So 7 pounds of PLS recommended per acre divided by the pure live seed percentage as a not as a full number percentage, but as a 0.46. You need to move the decimal decimal over 2 places, and then you get the bulk seed amount per acre that you need to plant. And in other words, this kind of makes sense. So you basically, your PLS is about 50%, meaning that if you need to seed 7 pounds of PLS, you need to basically double that seeding rate, because your PLS is half of that amount of seed. So does everyone understand that? It's pretty simple math. So you just divide it by, you have to convert the percentage to the digits. So yeah, so that's the calculation. So for mixtures, you have to do the percent desired in the mix. All right, if whatever percent of that species is desired in mix times the pounds of recommended per acre is equal to the pounds of PLS mix per acre. Next. And you multiply the pounds of bulk seed, of course, per acre, what you need for each species, by the number of acres to be seeded, and that gives you the total amount of seed you need for the whole site. Next. So sometimes we recommend using a seed carrier. Seed carriers could be non-clump forming cat litter. We don't want to use the expensive clump forming cat litter, because that's going to mess you up in the seed box. We want it to flow readily. Sand, in some cases pelletized lime has been used. Out west it's more common, but rice hulls have been used. Or you can even mix a small grain seed as a nurse seeding, particularly for warm season grasses like an oats or a barley. We don't recommend cereal rye because it's pretty aggressive and it does have some allelopathic effects, meaning that it actually can prevent the germination and growth of other plant species that are seeded with it. It helps prevent the bridging of light fluffy seed, so it helps the seed flow through the seed box. It adds volume to the seed. Whenever you have maybe a smaller quantity of seed for a smaller acreage, rather than having all that pure seed, which is not filling the seed box, you can add these carriers to help basically bulk it up and add volume to that volume of seed, or that quantity of seed. And then it sometimes, in some cases, it'll actually allow you to use a regular grain drill as opposed to a native grass drill, especially if you're using de-on seed. Next. Okay, just some comments about pre-mixed seed. We generally recommend buying individual lots of the individual species separately, but most of the seed suppliers are selling these pre-mixed, kind of fancy mixes off the shelf. But that creates some, additional difficulties in actually getting the material into the ground. So just a few items that we came up with as far as pros and cons. For cool seasons, for instance, the pros would be, the mixes have been researched by the seed company. In most cases, often cheaper than custom mixes because they're already prepared. They can just ship it out quickly to the buyer. The cons would be, you know, a lot of those species in that mix may not always be suitable for that particular site that you're dealing with. And there also may be some unnecessary high cost species in some of these mixes. I think it's pretty much of a, you know, it's kind of a marketing thing too, where, you know, for example, Ernst has a Flight 93 mix. You know, that was a mix that they concocted for seeding the Flight 93 memorial when it became National Park Service, and just kind of a marketing thing. So all the species in that mix, they were suitable for Western PA, but they may not be suitable for Southern New Jersey or Central New Jersey, for instance. For
Chris,
warm season, huh?
do you want me to expand a little bit on the cool season stuff?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay. So yeah, as Chris said, some of the pros, like putting it in the aspect of hay plantains, or in cover crop. If you're specifically, if you're doing like a hay plantain, you know, we want all those species to mature at the same time. So these companies have already done that research. A lot of our forages, you can look to see, and on the tech sheet, it'll say this is an early maturing mix, or, you know, a medium maturing or a late maturing mix. And that's really important, because if a producer is custom mixing different forage species, you know, we want it all to be at the same maturity. We don't want some species that are premature to cut. We don't want some species that have already, you know, seeded out when we're cutting it, because we know that the quality of the forage goes down at that point. So having a pre-made mix is really great, because you know those maturities are all going to align in specifically like a hay mix. And then something that we run into, you know, of course, it's often cheaper because, like Chris said, you know, they don't have to mix it themselves and choose those different varieties, and a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and it's ready to just ship out right away. They're already made for the producer. But like Chris said too, a lot of times those mixes are not always suitable for the site. So another thing we run into when we work on pasture and hay plantains, like in the Pinelands area, you know, there's very few mixes from some of our typical, like our Kings and Seedway and places like that, that actually work really well in those areas. You know, it might be favoring a high fertility rather than low fertility, or droughty versus, you know, wetter soils, things like that. And so being able to custom make a mix is great, because you can pick those varieties that are actually suitable for the site, and you're not spending money on things that don't actually work there. Another thing that comes into play too that we need to think about as planters is what that purpose of the mix is for. So if we're planting a 512 for erosion control, say, we would want in that mix something that's sod forming. We want something that is like a bunch grass as well. So we want different types of, I guess, a structure in that mix. And a lot of the mixes for our typical hay plantains are just going to be our bunch grasses. So that's something that, you know, that might not necessarily meet the purpose that we are planting that for. The species might work well in the site, but not for the purpose that it's being, you know, planned and paid for. And then a perfect example of something where, you know, having unnecessary high cost species for our cover crops, a lot of times people are really set on these like 7-way mixes, 15-way mixes. But again, it comes down to what's your purpose of that mix, and when are you planting it, and are you actually going to get the benefit from that? So if we have brassicas in a mix, like our tillage radish or maybe, yeah, let's go with tillage radish. You know, there's a lot of marketing around tillage radish. Everybody thinks it's great. That seed is also very expensive. You'll see it in a lot of cover crop mixes. However, if you're planting that mix with that brassica in it, you're planting it late in the season, you're going to terminate it earlier in the season, there's really not a point of getting a mix with brassicas in it. You can spend your money and get a better suited mix there's other species that do the same exact thing that tillage radish will do, that are a lot cheaper. And if we don't have the right planting season, the timing for those brassicas, having it in the mix is really just a waste of money. So that's really important to know. And that's communication with your producer as well. Like, when are you actually going to plant this, and making sure that whatever is in that mix is actually suited for the planting windows that that producer has. All right, sorry, Chris, you can keep going.
Oh, no need to be sorry. You can keep going. No, let me just, so when I was looking at the warm season pros and cons of pre-mixed, I guess I was trying to have a hard time of finding a positive for the warm season pre-mixes. But probably the biggest thing is that there is a limited availability. Of course, it varies year by year, but I recently became aware that I got a call from a professor at University of Maryland who was looking for Alamo switchgrass, like a few 100 pounds of Alamo switchgrass, and she couldn't find it anywhere. Nobody had Alamo switchgrass. So there's a limited availability of buying the individual variety species. If you're doing a diverse seeding of some kind, it may be advantageous actually to have a pre-mix done where maybe Alamo and some other things are already pre-mixed in an appropriate ratio of native grasses in a pre-mix. So you'll be able to get maybe what you need for your planting site, although you won't be able to get maybe the poundage you need of any one individual species just due to availability. So again, there may be some advantages to doing the mixes. The cons would be, you may need to use a specialized seed drill, which again, these are more common now. People are aware of them. They're being used. But oftentimes these mixes of warm season grasses have both fluffy and smooth mixed together. So which seed box do you use? Do you use the fluffy seed box, and then the smooth seed kind of like falls right out, comes out very, very quickly. So that's the biggest con of using a pre-mix of the warm seasons. And then, seed is typically more expensive. So that's another negative for the warm season grasses. So next, anything else, Caitlin or Betsy, about that? About those pre-mixes?
I think you covered it all.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Good
All
job.
right. All right, thanks. So date tested. I hope I'm not confounding what Caitlin's going to talk about, the state standards for this, but the date should be within 12 months of the planned date for using the seed that it's been tested. Some states require it being within 9 months of retail sale. Although a few states require the test to be done within 18 months. So it kind of varies, but obviously the most recent test to when you're actually doing the seeding is the most advantageous, of course. As far as seed storage goes, I mean, most of these big commercial seed suppliers like Ernst and Roundstone and Pinelands, they store their seed under cool, conditions in a cold storage refrigerator like we do here. Ideal temperature for long-term seed storage is about 38 to 42 degrees, so it's above freezing with a 30 to 40% relative humidity. If you're purchasing seed and then you're not ready to seed it right away, but you're going to be seeding it, within a month or so of when you receive the seed, short-term storage could be in a cool, dry, or dark and dark locations. Cool, dry, and dark. So you want to avoid a moist location. You want to avoid sunny or any hot locations, because you got to consider that you're dealing with a live embryo there, and you don't want to kill the embryo by having it sitting out in the sun and baking in the sun. Or you don't want to store it in moist conditions where it's going to get mold, which can happen very easily also. Next. Oh, so now I think we're on to you, Caitlin, right?
Yep. Let me, I'll talk about this state instruction a little bit. Those of you that have been around a while probably know the state instruction exists. If you're new, I would recommend finding the state instruction. It's on our SharePoint site where all the other state instructions are. Might answer a lot of your questions. But we do have the state instruction for planning, for the planning and certification of vegetative practices. And I just have listed here the different sections of the state instruction. It's pretty long. I think it's like 7 or so pages. But it should cover any questions that you might have if somebody plants something outside of a seed-in window, or if they use different species than what were originally planned for. I'll just briefly tell you what's in each of these sections in case you have questions and you're like, oh, yeah, I can answer that question maybe by going and checking this out. So the first section is certifying practices, obviously not implemented to plan specifications. If it was if it was implemented to the plan specifications, then you would just certify it as normal. But that first section there, it covers anything that you might want to think about for any situation that might come up. So, and it talks about, making sure that the purpose is still being met by the new planting or the planting outside the window or whatever it is. And it also covers what documentation you need for certification if it wasn't implemented exactly as planned. So that's a really good place to look. A lot of times it might happen with cover crop. It gets seeded late, or they use like their own seed or something like that, which brings us to the next part of the bulletin here, using bin run or retained seed. This section talks about the testing that's required for using bin run seed. We do allow producers to use their own seed or retained seed, or if they buy like rye from a neighbor or something like that. It's not certified, but we do have testing requirements on it. So you can certify that, yes, it meets the PLS that's required per the standard. And so that's in there. You might want to check that one out. Planting different species. So if you have spec'd out a mix, or if you have a tech sheet from, a pre-made mix, and then the producer switches it up on you, is like, oh yeah, actually I planted this instead and didn't tell you ahead of time. Then this section here will cover, how to make sure that that purpose is still being met. Again, how to document that the new planting still meets standards and specifications. So it'll kind of walk you through that process there. And then planting cover crop with multi-species. This will tell you which tables to look at in the vegetative planting guide, and also how to use those tables to design a mix. So if somebody, again, is not using a pre-made mix, they're going to do a custom mix, or you're looking to do a custom mix for them, you might want to check out this part of the state instruction. And then we went over PLS today quite a bit. But a lot of questions come up about how to calculate PLS with coated seed. So a lot of times seed will be coated to make it easier to flow through the planter, to give a little bit of weight to the seed. There's a bunch of different reasons why seed might be coated. Sometimes it's even coated with like a pesticide or something like that. That's a whole different discussion. But anyways, so there will be information that will be coated seed will show up as inert material or like other material on the seed tag. And this will explain to you how to calculate that PLS with that coated seed. So recommended pasture and hay plantings, that section is very similar to the cover crop section. Again, it tells you which tables to use in the vegetative planting guide. It tells you how to use pre-made mixes and certify those mixes, versus if you do a custom mix for somebody and what you would need to certify a custom mix that's made. And then using the waiver. So if somebody does plant outside the seed window, they plant something different than you originally spec'd out. They use that bin run seed, and that seed and rate, it turns out to be different after you run those PLS calculations. Really anything that might need a waiver, there is a standardized waiver form that we have attached to the state instruction. And that form would be signed by the producer. You would make sure, they meet all the requirements in the state instruction. It's signed off by the producer, and then the DC reviews it. So the planner can work with the producer to fill it out and everything. The producer signs it. And then the DC, it's their responsibility to make sure that all the requirements of the state instruction are still being met, that the purpose is being met, that was originally planned for, all of those things. And then the DC will sign off on it. If they find that there is something wrong with the planning, there's a spot for the DC to say, like, do not recommend this waiver. So it can just stop there and you can stick it in the file. If it is going forward, then that waiver would be filled out and it gets sent to Evan. And then he signs off on it if he thinks everything looks good. And then you can stick that form in the file as the official documentation that you are going outside of the standard of what, if it's the cover crop standard, the 512 standard. I think like, conservation cover, really any vegetative planting that you do would be covered under that waiver. So just so you know, that waiver is there. And I know I get emails saying, hey, can you approve this or that? And I say probably will be approved, but you still need to fill out this waiver. So any questions on the state instruction? Again, if you go to our SharePoint site, the New Jersey SharePoint site, that you'll find it right under, state policy and bulletins, I think is the heading where you'll find that. And the waiver is just to change anything that's outside of our New Jersey standard. So all of our standards, they might have, well, they refer to the vegetative planting guide now, but that vegetative planting guide, the IRs, anything else, that's really an extension of the standard. The IRs are maybe a little bit iffy, but definitely Tech Notes, the vegetative planting guide, that's an extension of the standard. So if we're going outside of our own set, seed and rates, seed and windows, mixes, allowable mixes, things like that, we can't do a waiver for the national standard. So this is just waiver in our own technical information that we have set in New Jersey. Okay, that's all I have on that one. So does anybody have any questions? We're like right at 9:30, but if there's questions, we can hang on for a little bit.
All right, so it looks like no one has a question. I don't see anything on the chat. So I just want to say thank you so much for all the information that Betsy, Caitlin, and Chris shared with us for the seed tags. I'm gonna stop recording now. I just want to apologize again for what happened at the beginning, technical issues with the invites. If anyone knows if there's people who are not getting these invites, please let me know or ask them to send me a email so I can include it. So for now, I want to say thank you so much for everyone to attending, and we will see you again in the next Technical Tuesday. Have a great day. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.